Okay, so anyway, as you can tell, this isn't about cigars. It's about some questions that were posed to Min Romney in in February 22nd of 2016. This gentleman here, Robert Heaven Street, was able to open up a dialogue with Min Romney, and he posted this in Cigar Journal for people to submit questions to this email address, and then he was going to take these questions and submit them to Min Romney, and then once he got the answers, he was going to post them on his blog site, which is here. And he did that in May of 2017. So for those of you that did not see the introduction to my YouTube channel, basically the inspiration for my YouTube channel was this Illustrated Encyclopedia Post-Revolution Havana Cigars. This is a rundown of the first edition of the book on the Cuban Cigar website, and it just talks about how the book was released in January of 2003. It's 492 pages, and then the German release was 520 pages, and it had some extra stuff, I believe, from 2003 that was released. But the English version only has stuff up to 2002, so it's getting a bit out of date. And there is a he talks about here in 2014 the second edition is going to be released, but the second edition hasn't been released yet. But another gentleman that has a open dialogue and is friends with Min Romney, Nino Munoz here, who has the Nino's Flying Cigar. This is a great blog, by the way. He travels around. He's a great guy, and he does a lot of stuff with cigars and has a lot of fun. And he has an open dialogue with Min Romney, and he actually put a PDF together of the new printing, the second edition, in a PDF format. So if you want to take a look at what's possibly coming up, this PDF here is just 27 pages. The second edition is going to be 9 volumes of pictures and information like EMS, just things like that. He talks about EMS and AMS, American market selection, English market selection, right? There's a lot of information in the first book, but he's going to just have way more information in the second edition, of course, because with that many more volumes. So, and there has been a delay on this thing. And, the one thing that I can glean from this is that, and I guess to use as an example, if you write something on a website, you can just go in there and change it if you're wrong. If you have a newspaper and you print something, then usually a newspaper will print a redaction, when they find out that it's wrong, and they print the redaction in the newspaper, and, it goes from there. But when you do a book like this and you do 9 volumes, you definitely have to have things right, because you can't reprint it. Once it's in paper, once it's in book form, that's it. And so, you can't just say, oh, I'm going to, I'll just reprint the book with the correct information in there, and then just, tell everybody to send their second edition back, and so on and so forth. So anyway, I'm sure that, I'm hoping that he comes out with a second edition, but you never know. But anyway, you can at least look at the 27 pages that are proposed here for, the second edition, and get some information. There's actually some pretty good information just in these 27 pages, like this EMS right here, talking about, how that came about, and so on and so forth. And anyway, but another thing of note is that this book was released in 2003 to the general public. So now, where he got his information and everything like that, he's at a way different level from most mortal human beings, as opposed to being able to get information from the various people in the cigar community that have the straight information that's factual and true. So he's, he did that, But most people in the general public, especially before this book was released, um, the general public wasn't, I guess, super interested or super knowledgeable on the fact of aging, potential maturation periods, and so on and so forth with cigars. And it wasn't until this book was released that actually people took note of that and started experimenting and testing whether or not this stuff was actually true. In the first edition, there was plenty of tasting notes. So for each marca, for each brand, he would have like general tasting notes in there, and then not for every cigar in there, but for quite a few cigars in here, he would actually have individual tasting notes for those cigars as well. And that was something that people really hadn't, really, I don't know, put to paper and put out there to the general cigar community. I think that knowledge was pretty much kind of locked up or sequestered within a very small vintage cigar community that knew that information and had that information. And it wasn't until this book came out where the general public, and then it became kind of like general knowledge that, hey, there are uh, different maturation periods for the cigars. They're like wine; they mature over time, and they can get better over time and have various things, a vacuum period, a sick period, and 1 through 3 maturation periods on top of that. Um, so this was kind of a controversial book when it came out in January 2003, and to the point of people aging cigars and so on and so forth. There was an interesting in UK cigar scene with James Suckling. Nick Wing was interviewing him, and he was living in London at the time from like '88 to in the '90s before he started doing his cigar aficionado gig. But he was talking about going in there and smoking cigars, and listen to what he had to say about aged cigars and new cigars.
Knowledgeable of Desmond and all these amazing old codgers in the cigar business. And like some young Yank was sort of hanging out and smoking with them, but they were still really friendly. And oh no, taste this, try that. Cigars weren't expensive. I remember when I first came to London, Desmond, there was a sign in his store on Piccadilly. It says, old cigars £1 each. The old cigars were cheaper than the young cigars.
So, to his point, before this book came out, people were aging their cigars. I think he actually mentions this is a great interview too here. UK, if you just Google UK cigar scene on YouTube, there's tons of videos on this thing here too. Just tons and tons of videos where Nick Wing did from 2016 to 2017. Unfortunately, Nick Wing is no longer with us, but he interviewed Simon Chase, James Suckling, Ronald McDonald. There's just a lot of people that he interviewed, and it's really fun to go through these things and just listen to the questions that he poses to these people because you get a lot of knowledge out of this thing. So anyway, but getting back to this, so this was released in 2003. The general public started getting involved and interested, and if you are aware of any auctions or any forums or even your friends or you yourself, that an aged old cigar usually costs more than a brand new cigar, depending on, of course, the type of cigar. Now, there's a lot of these newer ones that are coming out and so on and so forth where, um, there's a lot of interest in the newer cigars, especially some of the Cohiba stuff that's come out. I think like the last one that came out here in 2017, the Talisman. I think that thing's going for like, I don't know, 65 or 75 pounds per cigar already. So that's like about $100 a cigar already, and it's a 2017 release. So the cigar industry you know, and cigars in general, I think are doing another boom here. But back then, they were cheap, and he released this book, and then people in the general public started experimenting and testing and thinking, you know, let's see. So what's going on with this thing? And I think that kind of actually pushed the vintage cigar market even further, because we had the cigar boom in roughly 1993 when Cigar Aficionado came out, and then we had his book released in 2003, 10 years later. And so they definitely, um, you know, it definitely helped to push that along even further. And, you know, vintage age cigars today, I mean, there's some insanely expensive vintage cigars. I mean, off the top of my head, Dunhill Estupendo, that cigar, like I said, sold at auction recently for about, I don't know, $1,200 a stick. So they're not all like that, but they're getting up there. So anyway, he writes this book. This guy asks him some questions. So, you know, I want to take a listen. And there was a lot of other people that were very interested in this. So I'm not going to go through all the questions. I'm just going to go through a few of them, because what the ones, you know, what was interested in me is like, hey, how do I store my cigars? You know, how do I smoke my cigars, or whatever? Do you, you know, how do you know, just basic general questions that I wanted to do. Now, like I said, there was 15 questions and answers in here. Feel free to go through all of them, and these did create a bit of uh, a wide range of thoughts on these questions and answers. There was, you know, people that thought that it was, you know, it was really awesome that he did this. There were some people that say he didn't go far enough with his answers, and there are other people that say it wasn't really of any consequence. So there was that wide range of people, but everybody, I believe, that had some thoughts or has thought about vintage age cigars or has read this book definitely was interested in what he had to say, and I was one of them. So, but anyway, um, I'm just going to go through a few of these questions real quick, because I know this video is really long, but you know, just here on question 2, I just wanted to know if you have single sticks of Cuban cigars. How do you store them in your humidor? I have seen things from you should keep them divided by brand. Should you group them all together? I just wondered what's the best way to store my single Cuban cigars. So basically what he says is I store single sticks long-term in Ziploc bags at 12 degrees centigrade and 55 to 60% relative humidity. So for those of you who don't know centigrade, centigrade or Celsius to Fahrenheit is 53.6 degrees. So that's where he stores them, like wine, about 53.6 degrees with 55 to 60% relative humidity. And then down here he says I always mix different marcas and different ages of cigars. Long or short term, no harm is done as far as I'm concerned. So right there, you know, which is good, because a lot of us, you know, we don't have the funds or anything like that for cigars, and we have to buy single sticks, and so, and he says right there it doesn't really harm, according to him, any of the flavors or anything like that, which to me was good news. So I've started doing that with any single sticks that I have. I'll just, you know, put them in a bag. Now I do, like, if I have like some other, like I have some Dunhill Don Candido Selection 506s, and I'm keeping those separate, just because I just want them all together so I know where they're at. I guess I can find them easier or whatever. But anyway, for the most part, that's you know, that's what I do too as well. And I've been, you know, trying to store this stuff here at this temperature and humidity as best I can. And here's one thing though here, I'm going to get into this a little bit later, because he goes down here a little bit later. I'm going to go in here and talk about that as well. So how do you deal with rarities which are sealed? Do you open them? If not, how do you make sure that you have purchased cigars in impeccable condition? So basically says he never opened any sealed boxes to inspect. I never encountered any problems with sealed boxes. So, and you've seen, you guys, if you're not new to the channel, you know that I have opened up quite a few old sealed boxes of cigars, and I haven't encountered any problem with beetles in my old sealed boxes of cigars, but that doesn't mean it can't happen. But I prefer to get sealed boxes myself personally. And so there it is there. That's what I try and do. Now, there's a lot of people. I know that in England, they open up and inspect all the boxes so that, that's the way they do it there. I know there's other cigar merchants that will open up boxes and inspect them. But anyway, I think that for me personally, that's a personal preference. Me personally, if I'm going to buy a vintage box of cigars, if it's sealed, I don't have a lot of concern either. And like I said, I've opened up on camera quite a few sealed boxes of cigars and never had an issue. So take it for what it's worth. So anyway, let's do one more here. Question 10 or 11 or 12. Here we go. Well, 11. Let's use 11. A lot of aficionados, vintage cigar dealers recommend smoked vintage cigars which are stored at lower humidity. Could you please explain the reasons if you share the opinion? Low RH is essential for aging. This has been scientifically proven. And I'm afraid this needs a lot of words to explain. In the future second MRN book, that is, if there is one. So, it may not come out. I shall explain the science behind this in detail and with quoted scientific papers. So he's saying that the scientific papers are out there that discuss relative humidity, but he's not going to basically take up the whole blog with one answer to one question on that. But he says that basically low relative humidity is better for storing cigars. Now, when it comes to smoking them, when he's talking about revitalizing old cigars, which, he says that is for the quality still remaining. But then he says for smoking, he stores them in a humidor at room temperature at 72% relative humidity, naked for at least 1 month before smoking. Never rush this time frame. So I've actually tried this right here. And I've done some side-by-sides where I've stored them like at 65% and then the 72%. And for a vintage aged rare cigar, it definitely, for me personally, it seems to enhance the flavors. For a younger cigar, for me, I've tried this with younger cigars, and it seems to kind of enhance some of the not so good flavors. Just off the top of my head, bitterness and tannicness seems to come to the forefront more so with a 72% humidified newer cigar. So for me, it seems to work. Anyway, that's pretty much all I want to go through on this thing. Like I said, there's 15 questions here. I guess I can put the links up here where you can, below, where you can just click on the link and go to it, not have to Google anything, and go from there. But anyway, like I said, this is just really interesting to read some of these questions and answers. Like I said, there was various people that thought various things about this thing, and like I've always said, I've always had an open mind on things. I try not to have contempt prior to investigation, and I try things out and see if they work. And if they work, then I do them. If they don't work, then I don't do it. But at least I try it first, and that's I think is a good thing. I think that that's something that people need to do is try things first. If it works, great. If it doesn't, then you don't do it. So whatever. Anyway, I hope that I was able to impart a little bit of something into people and let people know, like, this is what I'm looking at. Because I've had people that have asked me questions on this stuff, and this is basically what I think and what I believe, and take it with a grain of salt, or take it for what it's worth, or my 2 cents, or whatever, and move on and try and find out what's best for you. Anyway, I've rambled on enough, and that's enough out of me.